Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. In July, it'll be half a century since Turkey invaded Cyprus, causing thousands to flee their homes north and south. Repeated talks have been held to bring long-term peace to the island, but to little effect. Now, possibly more than ever, the island's future is part of a much wider dynamic. The discovery of oil and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean has entrenched divisions. Turkey is demanding recognition of Northern Cyprus before anything else can happen. So we're asking, what, if anything, would it take to bring about a united Cyprus? Fiona Mullen runs a think tank based in Cyprus, Sapienta Economics, and she's going to give us an introduction to this thorny problem. Hello and welcome, Fiona.
Hello, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. You've got a huge amount of experience in this. You were a contributor for the Economist Intelligence Unit for about 15 years, from 2001 to 2015. You worked as an economic advisor to the UN's special advisor to the Secretary General on Cyprus until about 2016, and you still work for the Good Officers Mission, which is really trying to work on a long-term solution. So a huge amount of experience. Fiona, I want to do some basics first. Can we let's just bring up a map of Cyprus as it is today, and can you just take us through some really basic geography? So I'm going to click on something here, and yeah, there we go. So that's a map of Cyprus as it is today, and then we're going to go back and look at things a bit earlier as well. So just what can we see north, south, and also the British bases there as well?
Yeah, so this is the island of Cyprus. Most of it still today is internationally recognized as the Republic of Cyprus, apart from those little areas you see, the sovereign base areas, which are down in the south, a kind of yellowy color, and a bit further to the east in the Kelia. So, but since 1974, Cyprus has been de facto physically divided. It's actually been politically divided for longer than that, but physically divided between the northern part and the south. So the northern part is depending on your where you're standing, but it's the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey call it the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It's not recognized by anybody at all apart from Turkey. There's a UN Security Council resolution condemning that unilateral declaration of independence. And then the south, so when people talk about the Republic of Cyprus, they generally mean that area in the south, Paphos, Nicosia, Larnaca, Limassol. But yeah, it's about something like I think 1/3, 2/3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. In a moment, I'd like to roll back the clock a bit and talk about the situation before 1960, when the island was much more ethnically mixed. I think everyone watching is going to remember the TV, probably old enough to remember the TV pictures of the Turkish invasion in 1974 that basically created the map as we see it today. But I want to produce another map here, which, if I can get get organized to do it. Hang on a second. Where are we here? I just have to find the stop share, and then I have to try and share another map here. Here we go. So this is a map of Cyprus which reflects the 1960 census. What are we looking at here, Fiona?
So this is Cyprus in 1960. That's the last census of the entire island before all the troubles began. And what you can see in blue is where was primarily, the darker blue is 100% Greek Cypriots. The dark red is 100% Turkish Cypriots, but you can also see these sort of orangey areas where it was what were called the mixed villages. But the key thing is that the population was scattered all over the island. So the only place that was really predominantly Greek Cypriot is probably, I think that's the Troodos Mountains, that part in the middle there. So So obviously, as a result of actually began in '63, but when the Turkish Cypriots were either went or were pushed, depending on your point of view, into enclaves. But then by the time of the invasion in '74, we have completely red basically in the north and completely blue in the south.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that critical period, 1955 to 60, and also after that, you have a situation of increasing friction between the Greeks and the Turks. And this is really on the back of a push by a independence movement, a Greek independence movement to, well, first of all, to unify with Greece.
Yes, that's right. So in 1955, AOKA, they're called, is the abbreviation for it, started essentially an armed struggle against British rule, because Cyprus was under British rule up until there was officially a crown colony from 1925 up to 1960. So AOKA started this armed struggle as part of that. So they wanted union with Greece, Enosis, as it's known. And as part of that, they were attacking both Turkish Cypriots and left-wing Greek Cypriots. But also, as a result of that, then the Turkish Cypriots started arming themselves with what was called TMT. So that's the trouble was originally it was mainly the British who were targeted, but it wasn't only, they weren't the only ones who were affected. Yeah.
And then when independence was granted or negotiated in 1960, including the creation of those two sovereign bases, I'm going to come back now to the other map now, which we were looking at earlier. That didn't solve the problem. In that friction, those hostilities continued.
Yeah, well, so okay, one of the issues with the Republic of Cyprus constitution is it wasn't written by the Cypriots. It was written by essentially the British and possibly the Americans, I forget. But and as part of this, so the Greek Cypriots wanted union with Greece. The Turkish Cypriots wanted to sort of split the island and have their part united with Turkey. And the compromise was, no, you were going to have this power sharing constitution where Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots governed together. And that really only lasted in practice until 1963. So it started to fall apart fairly soon. And even though there was this long period where technically, so Turkish Cypriots removed themselves from government in 1963. So it has been de facto run by the Greek Cypriots since that time.
Yeah. Okay. So that I think it was important to get some of that that background, but before we enter into, I mean, there's so many aspects to this. This is complex. The Turkish invasion in 1974, huge numbers of people basically Greeks flee from the north, and then Turks who are in the south within these enclaves that have been created over that preceding time rush north too. So there's almost like an exchange of population. The Turks take the northern third of the island, and that is the situation right up until today. And there are a huge number of issues, quite apart from what the status of the island, that are festering, that hang over from that time, and we're going to get into that in a second. Can you run through with us the main attempts to try and come up with a solution? Just run through the dates. What attempts have there been over the last 5 decades? What are the key points that we should pick up on?
Let me look at my notes, because there's been so many, it's difficult to right, hang on, sorry. So we had there were, I think, the first attempts at a solution. They were even trying to have a solution days before the coup. The coup was kind of inspired by Greece, which had a military junta at the time. There were negotiations still going on at that stage to try and sort things out. But really, it was the 80s and 90s when you first started to get the first attempts at a solution. And each one of those kind of, how can I say, sort of locks in certain kinds of agreements. So the idea that it will be bizonal, or the idea that it will be bicommunal. So the model that has been always discussed to date, and we'll see if it will be in future, but is this called bizonal bicommunal federation. So what does that mean? It's
Okay, what do those two phrases mean?
Yeah.
What does
bizonal
mean?
Bizonal means essentially the North continues to be under federation. So you have two what would be called constituent states and a federal government in the middle. So, like United States has a lot more states, and then the federal government in the middle. So the North would be run essentially by the Turkish Cypriots and the South by the Greek Cypriots. So a kind of, in a way, continuity of what is the case. And then the bicommunal is that the federal government would consist of both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, and even down to exactly how many Turkish Cypriots would sit in the Council of Ministers and how many Greek Cypriots. So that would be that sort of started. Now you're testing my historical knowledge. I think it was the early 90s, the first sort of mention of that.
Yeah.
And then other ideas about territory and things like that.
Yeah.
But the big push, the biggest push came in 2004, just before Cyprus was about to join the European Union, with what's called the Annan Plan. And there was a massive push. The president of the Republic of Cyprus, Tassos Papadopoulos, campaigned against it. And so you got a 76% no from the Greek Cypriot side. And it was, I was here during that time. It was,
and what this is, that's a critical point. You can understand with Cyprus joining the EU, that's a clear opportunity, and not the EU is very careful not to have, doesn't like divided countries coming into it, doesn't like importing a problem. So here's a point at which it really wants to try and solve that problem. So why does the president of Cyprus oppose unification at that point?
Lots and lots of reasons, but so the cynical reason is he never wanted it. His argument would have been, he's long gone now, but it would have been that one of the key arguments he was making is we give up everything on day one, and Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots only have to do their part gradually over a number of years. He gave this speech when nobody knew which way he was going to go, and then I should have read it before coming on, but it was short notice, so that's my excuse. But it was really the other thing that was really interesting at the time was, before I'd come to Cyprus, working at the Economist Intelligence Unit as a full-timer there, I wasn't covering Cyprus at that time, but I had a sort of general idea of Cyprus, and I knew what the likely content of any settlement plan would be. But it was a massive shock to Greek Cypriots, because they had been told for decades that a solution of the Cyprus problem meant getting all their property back, going back home, and quote unquote throwing the Turks in the sea. This was a kind of terminology. And then along comes the Annan Plan, and they suddenly realize, oh, well, we're not getting Kyrene back, and we're not getting, and so no one had ever prepared them, because they'd always said, similar in a way to Palestinians, oh, we're all going to go back and so on. So it was a big shock, and it was done, it was something like 3 weeks from the publication of the final version of the Annan Plan to the referendum. And you had essentially the entire establishment against it, and that flags everywhere, banners everywhere saying no, 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 no. So it was, you'd have to be quite brave to stand up and say, no, I'm going to vote in favour of this,
But the Turkish Cypriots voted in favour of it.
Yeah, overwhelming. So you had 76% no on the Greek Cypriot side and 65% yes on the Turkish Cypriot side.
And so why did they vote in favour of it? What was their motivation?
Because they, at the time, so just a year beforehand, just to explain, until 2003, you couldn't cross from one side to the other unless you could just about get permission if you were a foreigner. So I went in late 2002, I think. But essentially, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots couldn't cross, because it was the barrier was closed, basically. And then, without warning, and possibly as a byproduct of court cases on property, but also because there was a lot of pressure on Rauf Denktash, the Turkish Cypriot leader at the time, they suddenly opened the crossing points. And so you had so why were the Turkish Cypriots in favour? Being stuck on that side with no proper passports, no nothing, they couldn't go anywhere, and they could only get anywhere through Turkey and so on.
Yeah.
So, and even today, despite the fact that the current leadership in Northern Cyprus is promoting a two-state solution, the opinion polls still show that if you held a referendum tomorrow, the Turkish Cypriots would still vote yes. So, they know that they used the Turkish lira, so they had like 100% inflation last year. They know that they're suffering from the division a lot more than the Greek Cypriots.
Very simply, if we were to talk about what are the fundamental issues today, I mean, this is me as a complete outsider. Mm-hmm. I imagine that if you're a Turkish Cypriot, here's the problem: your island, so your country is not recognized, and it's not going to be, at least seemingly it's not going to be. Yeah. You don't have any integration with the world economy. You're not accepted, internationally in any way. And here on the other side of the border, you can see that Greek Cypriots are members of the European Union. They can travel anywhere. They've got access to finance, banking, whatever. And you have a sort of pariah status. So that would be the incentive.
I should just add that there's a sort of dual situation in all. So if you can establish that you are a child of Cypriot parents, you will get a Republic of Cyprus passport as a Turkish Cypriot. If one of your parents is Turkish, they tend to sit on it for decades, but that's a whole other issue that's going to courts and things like that. But so they are in a better position than they were before Cyprus joined the EU. So at least there's about 110,000 Turkish Cypriots who've now got Republic of Cyprus, i.e. European Union passports. So then they can get they can travel, or they can get access to.
What's the population of Northern Cyprus then?
That is a massively contested question. It's probably about 400,000.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a significant number. A quarter of the population with Republic of Cyprus passports. Yeah. That's significant.
And there's 100,000 students. About 3/4 of those are Turkish students. So it's one of the most contentious things about the demographics of Northern Cyprus is how many people are there, and who's a Cypriot and who's not. And let's say at one end you have, let's say from the Greek Cypriot point of view, people counting anybody who's not born of Cypriots as what they call settlers, because there was a settlement program in the 1980s. They did bring generally rural Turks from sort of southeastern Turkey, Anatolians.
They gave them property. They were basically encouraged from Turkish rural areas to come over.
Resentment. Yeah. But since then, you have a lot of migrants.
Just to keep moving along, not getting bogged down in the population.
But just because it's an important point, is that so that's one group. Then there are a whole bunch of migrant workers, not necessarily Turkey, Turkmens and things like this, and a whole bunch of students. So to count all of those and say, everybody's Turkish is it's misrepresenting it basically. Yeah. So.
Okay, so from the Greek Cypriot point of view, the fundamental, I guess it's sort of dawned upon people, is that it's never going to be the same as it used to be, but people either want their property back, or the very least significant compensation. And then I guess the question is, what do they get? I mean, I presume they want a solution to this somewhere or other. I'm trying to understand if they have moved on from that reluctance, and how things changed in terms of people's psyche since 2004.
It's a good question, and it's difficult to tell. So if you ask a Greek Cypriot, do you want a solution of the Cyprus problem, they'll say yes. If you say, do you want a bizonal, bicommunal federation, they'll say yes, as long as there isn't a president bitching about it at the time, which we had a couple of years ago. But if you say, do you want a Turkish Cypriot vice president, they're more likely to be uncomfortable about that. So the real, for me, the real fundamental issue for Greek Cypriots, there's two. The biggie obviously is security. You know, there's still tens of thousands of Turkish troops in the north and so on, and we can get onto that later. But the other issue is they've only shared power for 3 years, and those were 3 troubled years, and Greek Cypriots are not really, I mean, there's the emotional suffering, and of course they suffered if the people who were displaced in 74, but there's not a visible problem with the economy and things like that with having a divided island. So it's a really hard sell for them. You know, you're governing and especially in what I put diplomatically call it a clientelist society, that you suddenly have to share your spoils with somebody else as well, you know, and it is a hard sell. And I think even the previous president kept talking, even at the UN General Assembly, was suggesting that whatever setup you had, you'd always have Turkey in our government, and so there's this very, very deep-seated fear of Turkey, and I think, yeah, so it's not obvious that that when it really comes to it,
yeah,
people will actually want it. So.
Okay, we will talk in a bit about the Trans-Montana negotiations, and we'll get in a bit more detail in a second. But let's just talk about who are the other key actors. Turkey is the obvious one, and we'll talk about that in a second. You've got the UN as the main arbitrator, the main body, obviously, that not only oversees the buffer zone between North and South, but has been trying to look for a solution for some time. Who else? Who are the other? The US and the European Union, the other key partners, I presume?
Yeah, so under the establishment of the Republic of Cyprus, you had 2 other treaties, one of which was the Treaty of Guarantee, and that gave Turkey and the UK and Greece essentially military intervention rights. And that was the treaty which Turkey used as its argument to come in 1974. But it's only supposed to be to restore the constitutional order or something like that, but obviously they stayed. So they have anything, especially any aspects to do with security, you need the assent of the UK, Greece, and Turkey. Normally, the UK and Greece are basically happy. What happens in practice is they will go along with whatever everybody agrees, as long as they don't feel threatened by it, you know. So as long as the British keep their bases, they'll probably be happy, and the Greeks, as long as they don't feel that Turkey's going to be running that place. So there are, but then diplomatically, the UK remains important because also it's what's called the pen holder at the UN Security Council on the resolutions on Cyprus. So they tend to draft them and
right. Okay.
Get lots of moans from the Greek Cypriot media about it. And then the US is still quite engaged because the Eastern Mediterranean is an area that they're interested in, obviously. So they tend to weigh in sometimes to prevent Turkey from going too far and things like that, or sometimes to push the Greek Cypriots and so on. And then, yes, the EU is increasingly important. And there's a big debate about how much they should be involved. The Greek Cypriots want them more involved at the moment. The Turks say no, because Cyprus is a member and so is Greece, so it can't be a neutral actor.
In a way, for the EU, it's more of an existential issue, because if you, whatever the result is, it's going to be the EU's problem. And if you've got a country, you can think of Hungary, for example, kicking up troubles, and we know that Cyprus has had a very close relationship with Russia. You're importing problems if you've got a very strong Turkish element or a split government that can't agree on foreign policy issues. You know, there's some reasons for not having United Cyprus there.
Yeah, I mean, there has, I know it's not public, but I know there's been work done on how might you handle foreign policy in the event that you can't get agreement within Cyprus. And apparently it's doable. There's precedent with half the time Belgium doesn't have a government, and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, in practical terms, the main thing the EU's job will be is to get the Turkish Cypriots ready for full adoption of the EU body of law and join the Eurozone and all that kind of thing.
Okay, well, let's rattle through the sort of key things now and try and bring people up to date. What, as things stand, what is the Cyprus problem? What do you see as the main sticking points?
Yeah, so just to say that, from the Greek Cypriots' point of view, the Cyprus problem is, as they will always call it, invasion and occupation. So their problem is with Turkey. But from the Turkish Cypriot point of view, the Cyprus problem starts at the very earliest latest, let's say, in 1963. So what their problem is about Greek Cypriot potential dominance and/or desire to eliminate them and so on. So you're not even starting with an agreement on what is the Cyprus problem. And so the UN has to sort of delicately try and find a balance between the two, and that's reflected in the different subject areas which are covered within the negotiations. So what was the end of your question?
So, and then I guess the next thing would be, where are we now? What happened with Crans Montana? Why was there a big push in 2017 in Switzerland? And why did that end so badly?
So, why was there a push? It's a good question. At that particular time, I think, okay, so 2011, if I remember correctly, Cyprus discovered natural gas offshore, and that, even though so far it's not actually exploited any at all. So everyone else, Egypt discovers some, pumps it out the next day almost. But that was one reason to why the international community started to care again about saying, okay, we need to have another push. There was also, at the time, we had a Turkish Cypriot leader who was very much in favor of a solution, and a Greek Cypriot leader who historically had been, under the Annan plan, he'd been in favor of a solution, but he basically went kind of more hardline the longer he stayed in power. So
I mean, just because we haven't got much huge amount of time, I just wanted to bring it forward a bit. Now the situation is even more difficult potentially. Turkey has now adopted a position where it doesn't want a united Cyprus. It wants international recognition of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is clearly not going to happen. But they seem to be saying, look, these negotiations are never going to get anywhere. This is the starting point. It has to be a two-state solution. Two-state solution before we can do anything else. What's that? Is that an honest thing? Is that the bargaining point? What's their hope?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. So their position is two-state solution, but if you read the language carefully about what are the conditions for starting negotiations, they say recognition of the sovereign equality and equal international status, something like that. So it's not quite saying we need two states before we start. And in fact, arguably, in some of the previous, there's one from 2014, some of the previous joint declarations and agreements, you've arguably already got the sovereign equality. So it is a bit of a bargaining position, but I do think that their long-term game is to get two-state solution. And so how do you do that when the international community is not going to say yes? I mean, there's too many EU countries, like Spain is too worried about secession and so on. China even, on the permanent member of the Security Council. But so yes, on the one hand, it's a short-term bargaining tool, but on the other hand, I think it is potentially playing the long-term game as well. Yeah.
Okay. We are going to get to the stage where I hope we can get some questions from people. I'm also going to talk about what we're going to do on our study tour, and so questions about that too are all also welcome. So what's the latest situation? That there was no UN envoy. The UN has sent somebody new in last year. Who is that, and what are they doing?
Right. So so we had nothing at all from the 2017 Crown Montana until recently, and we've now got literally a couple of weeks ago. She's got a very long, long Latin name. So it's, if I get this right, Maria Angela Coella Olguin. So apparently it's Olguin, it's Holguin. And rather than being what's called a special advisor to the Secretary General, which the previous few people were, she's a personal advisor to
personal envoy.
Personal envoy, yes, PESG, that's right. And so on the one hand, that means she might be able to be a bit more flexible. So she's not going to go, hopefully not going to go straight into the weeds on specifics of negotiations. On the other hand, it does mean she's potentially her mandate is potentially weaker, and Turkey's made it clear that they want her to be gone in 6 months, and they've got elections on the 31st of March. So she's probably only got April, May, June to do anything. So it's pretty tight.
Is she going to do anything in that time, and what do you expect?
I think so. My tiny little ray of hope is I think there's a bit of an understanding, but I hope it's not wishful thinking that that we need to do things differently, because the design of the process is, it was invented in the 1950s. It's two guys in a room with a head over their shoulder looking to elections, and political parties who tend to be fairly conservative and so on. And guess what? They get to the final mile and they can't do it because they're worried about re-election, or they don't have the support from their parties. So I'm hoping that there's an understanding that if you broaden it out, because a lot of the opinion polls show that actually the public is more flexible than the leaders, than the political leadership. So that you need to do that.
So you're talking about a process that's possibly much more international, which doesn't give the two
much more democratic. So you actually have, if you've heard about citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy, this kind of thing. I mean, I have no idea if this is gaining traction. It's one of my hobby horses, and I go around banging on about it to anybody who might listen. But I have a lot of embassy clients, so it's kind of one of the things I do, plus still the good officers.
Do you know someone called Khan Ross? You must know Khan Ross of the Independent Diplomat. He's a big supporter of this idea
right.
too.
Okay. Good to know. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that will gain traction. Well, one of the biggest problems with the Cyprus problem is that you need far too many ducks in a row to get it right. You need Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaders who are, engaging in good faith. You need an international community that's not distracted by Ukraine, Gaza, etc., etc. And you need ambassadors on the ground who are switched it on enough to sort of make interventions at particular moments and so on, and plus the UN, of course. So it's incredibly difficult.
So, I mean, in the last couple of years, there have been clashes in the Mediterranean between the Greek and Turkish navy. In Cyprus, I think near Varosha, outside Famagusta, there was a road being built by the Turks to open up a new development very close to the UN buffer zone. And there was a clash in which UN peacekeepers actually got injured. I mean, this is pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's why they were imaginative about getting some kind of envoy on the ground, because there was normally you have an envoy when you're about to start negotiations, but because they can't agree on the basis of negotiations, the Secretary General appointed his personal envoy instead. So I think that's why there's been a bit of a push. Yeah. Also, we've had Turkey, it's no longer doing it, but up until about 2020, I think it was drilling in Republic of Cyprus licensed blocks offshore, drilling for gas. So right.
But they have done things that are, I mean, they have started developing, there are huge numbers of developments anyway, attracting Russians, attracting even Iranian tourists. There are some luxury
Israelis
villas
as well.
being set up. That's been going on for some time. It has a sort of a reputation for having dodgy money, but so does the Republic of Cyprus too. But there's a water project, a river from Turkey linked under the sea to all the way up to Kyrenia, which is an incredible project, which makes Northern Cyprus much more dependent upon Turkey. So,
and they want to build an electricity cable as well. And they've talked about gas pipelines as well, but I think that's...
So what's the cost? What happens if nothing is done? I mean, it would seem to me this has gone on for 5 decades, 50 years. It hasn't been Armageddon. It's just an entrenched situation. Well, let's just sort of keep it on the back burner.
Yeah, I think my biggest worry is that I don't think the Greek Cypriots have understood, the Turkish Cypriots do, because they can feel Turkey is having more and more political and economic influence over the north. For a certain period, it kind of managed its own affairs, apart from depending on Turkey for budgetary support. But in the south, I'm not sure that the Greek Cypriots really understand that the world order is changing around us. We can't guarantee that there will always be, even a geopolitically engaged US president, and that might change by next year, well, end of this year. So, and if you don't, and it's really, and of course nobody ever sees this, it's all behind the scenes, but it's really only because of US pressure or an Angela Merkel type leader that Turkey starts to behave. So I think signs like this, the trouble in the buffer zone, it's the increasing, let's say, hold of Turkey. So Turkey's gone more and more, what's the word? Authoritarian.
Yeah.
And there's a risk that Northern Cyprus does that as well. So one day Greek Cypriots will wake up and realise they've got a hard
missed an opportunity
down in the centre of Nicosia,
yeah.
and then we'll start complaining about it. But having not so the status quo is not static.
Yeah, that's the urgency of the situation. So tell us what kind of state do you think is possible? What do you envisage as a solution? You've talked about participatory democracy, in which you've got peoples on both sides, north and south, being involved in the decision-making process, so that when they consider these options, there isn't a huge, great big surprise because they've been involved in that process all along, and so therefore you've got more consent. What kind of Cyprus do you envisage? What kind of thing could you think? What would you think there would be?
You mean if we solved it, or
what kind of state are you looking at? What's realistic as what can you put on the table?
I'm going to say one contentious thing and one. So what's the most probable outcome is that we're still talking about this in 20 years' time and it's not been resolved. But I think if we were to get to a federal settlement of the Cyprus problem, first of all, you'd have to completely change the way you negotiate. But if that were possible, if you did it through this more democratic process, it's more likely to be a looser federation than has been envisaged in the past. So the idea is you have as few things as possible in the centre, and the constituent states manage everything else. That my argument is that's difficult to do in a Eurozone economy, because there's so many things that the Eurozone will just, dictate centrally, basically. So, but in theory, that's one idea that's floating around. Let's make it as loose as possible. Or you might end up with negotiated partition, but there isn't a Greek Cypriot leader who would ever put their neck on the line to do that. But I wouldn't rule it out completely. Not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but it might ultimately be the way we're going.
Yeah. Okay. I do want to. I'm going to be opportunistic, and I just want to walk through people through what we're going to be doing. We're going to start our tour in Nicosia. Just tell us about Nicosia. What it's for those who've never been. What is? I mean, it's structurally. You've got the north side, south side. Just tell us how it works, and also in terms of governments and institutions. Where are you? How does it work?
So I'm southeast of the old walls. So it's a very do a bit of promo here. It's a very I love the old town because it's inside these old Venetian walls. It's very characteristic and so on, and that is split down the middle. So in order to get to the northern side, you have to go through these gates and show your passport and so on and so forth, and the same on the way back.
And is there a noticeable difference between the Greek side and the Turkish Cypriot side?
Well, the first thing you notice is all the flags. It's a little bit less different than it was right at the beginning. It was very visibly, the old town in the north was a lot more kind of depressed and did feel like you were stepping into the Middle East kind of thing. But now I think
there is an economic difference. I mean, it does seem a bit more like a European high street in the south if you go down Ledger Street, and then the north side is a bit more the bizarre.
Yes, it is like that. Yeah. But parts which you would only know to go there if you are not that different. The same kind of cafes and stuff like that.
And in terms of the institutions, you've got the Republic of Cyprus. What have you got? Parliament, ministries.
Yeah. So in the Republic of Cyprus is a presidential system. So you've got a president who runs the Council of Ministers, who are not picked from Parliament. They normally are sort of technocrats or party members and so on. And then you have a Parliament. And for the past, as long as I can remember, the current governments, the previous government actually governs as a minority government. So they have to do lots of negotiating with other political parties. And that also makes them beholden to those parties on the Cyprus problem. And then in the north, you have a prime ministerial system. So the person elected as TRNC president, in quotes, is really their job is just to negotiate the Cyprus problem. That's and it's the prime minister, in quotes, who is the person who runs the administration. But they also have a parliament and so on as well. Right. So, and I think they have a time.
We've got some questions coming in. So I'll take a quick question from Sheila de Beleg. Go ahead, Sheila. If you open your microphone, put your question to Fiona.
Oh, hello. I was wondering what the relationship is between Greece and the Republic of Cyprus. Does the Greek government get involved? Does it care?
Mm-hmm. So they, once upon a time, there used to be this saying that Greece decides and Turkey follows. But I think that's beginning to change now. So let's say if Cyprus decides, Greece follows. And so in a way, the tail was wagging the dog, and the Greek Cypriots might do things that weren't necessarily in the interests of Greece. But I think that's beginning to change now. Greece is very keen on improving its relations with Turkey. And so I think it might, it's very careful in public not to be seen to be pushing the Greek Cypriots. But I think potentially in private there might be, if they get to a point where they're doing energy deals with Greece, with Turkey, then I think that kind of influence might come through. But yeah, generally speaking, in public, they're always on the same page. Yeah.
That's a good question. Our Nicosia is where we start, and we're going to end our tour, and that's where we're going to see the key politicians, journalists, and think tanks, and including, I hope, Fiona. But one of our first steps is actually go past one of the British bases, and they're based on the eastern side of the island. How do you pronounce it? Dekele? How do you say it?
Vekelia.
Vekelia. That's got its own. I mean, that's a sovereign base. So it's sovereign British territory. You can't go in, can you? I presume. I know it's got a.
Well, you can. It's got the best fish and chips in Cyprus, by the way.
Right.
So it's extraordinary. You just drive in and suddenly you realise you better slow down because this is actually the British bases and they will catch you if you're speeding and things like that. So Yeah, so it's this extraordinary situation where it's. I suspect Akrotiri might be more. I don't think I've ever been to Akrotiri. There's probably certain parts where you can't get in, but the basic sort of road you can drive through, like, and there's this famous fish and chip place down in Dekelia.
Yeah, which we're going to go to. Which we're going away from Britain to eat fish and chips. Like a true British holiday maker.
Yeah, yeah.
And after that, we're going to cross the border. We're going to go across the buffer zone. The buffer zone is controlled by the UN. You've got, I presume, UN troops from all parts of the world there, and that's a fairly straightforward process, crossing that border, presenting your passport, and going through.
Don't call it a border to the
boundary. Sorry, green line boundary. What is it called?
Cross to the north, I think it's
yeah,
things like that. But so depending on where you go through, there's one part where you can go through the British bases, or there's other parts where you will cross a bit of the UN buffer zone. But whatever you do, you end up showing your passport these days, both on the way out and the way in. So the Greek Cypriots at the beginning tried not to have people showing passports because they didn't want to treat it as an external border, but actually because of security reasons and so on and so forth, they've given up on that, and everybody has to show ID.
Yeah. And once across the border, one of the first places we're going to go to Famagusta and to Varosha. Varosha is controversial. I think people may have seen pictures of it. It's a time warp. It's a once a huge, hugely successful holiday resort from the 50s and 60s, and it's been fenced off, and hasn't changed since 1974. And that's the area that the Turks have been threatening to develop and turn into the Las Vegas of the Med.
Yes.
What's happening there at the moment?
So after the current Turkish leader was elected in 2020, they opened a small part of Varosha to the public, so something like 3% of it. And it's highly sensitive because there are UN Security Council resolutions about it and so on. But yeah, the long-term plan is to try and persuade the Greek Cypriots. So the way they're trying to do it is persuade the Greek Cypriots to sell their property so that they can turn it into Las Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just a great shame. I was part of the Famagusta Eco City project where we were trying to have a different vision for what might happen to Varosha and the surrounding areas, including
Famagusta is itself interesting in that it's got a free port. It has, I guess, the struggle for Northern Cyprus is trying to generate income. It's a country that doesn't have any recognition. It doesn't want to be too dependent upon the Turks, so it's trying to create other avenues of income, and the free port is meant to be part of that. What's happening there?
It's not in reality, not a lot. They don't export a lot in terms of goods. So their main source of foreign exchange is tourism and students. So higher education is absolutely massive, much bigger than the South. And mainly students from Turkey, Iran, all the places where you wouldn't be able to go, probably get a visa for an EU country or something, So.
And what kind of education are they offering? Why does an Iranian student want to go to Cyprus?
Because it's pretty cheap. Some of the faculties are actually, so even if the university itself might not have international recognition, they have faculties which are connected with Turkey, and so you can get your recognition that way, kind of thing. And yeah, so on and so forth. So, I'm sure it would be pretty difficult for an Iranian to get to Germany to study, let's say,
Yeah,
so.
But it's a very short, you change at Ankara or Istanbul, and then you fly down. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, amazing. Property development, another key thing. I'm hoping that we're going to look at a new development that is offering Russians and Iranians lovely, villas overlooking the sea.
Yeah,
but that's been going on for some time, hasn't it?
Yeah, but it's really mushroomed in the last couple of years, and half the problem is that you might not have proper drinking water, or do you really have the infrastructure to go with all of this development? And of course, most of it is on what is still under international law recognized as Greek Cypriot property. So it just complicates any settlement of the property issue even more.
Yeah, yeah. And you can still see vestiges of Greek villages or Greek, certainly churches that have been abandoned. You can still see other elements across the north of things from pre-1974.
And one of the things that the UN has managed to do with EU money is work on trying to maintain cultural heritage sites on both sides. So, for example, there's a Apostolos Andreas, so the Apostle Andrew monastery way out on the eastern tip is one of the places that's been done up, and then there are mosques in the south that that they maintain and so on. So I think it's a lot better than it was a couple of decades ago, where people keeping sheep in churches and stuff like that. So.
And the one area in which many people in the north and south are united on is in the environment, the environmental issues that affect the whole of the island, shortage of water, biodiversity, those issues. Yeah,
I'd say probably the younger people are united on it, and that there's still not much awareness of green issues among the older generation. We've only just got around to doing, recycling and stuff like that.
Yeah, one of the things I want us to go and look at is the dam that Turkey has built, bringing that water supply from Turkey into Northern Cyprus is very controversial, but supplying much needed water for an island that's having big issues with water. Well, Fiona, I think we've covered a huge amount of ground here. I'm very grateful. You had to step in at last minute. Another speaker fell ill, and I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to speak with you, and you've covered all of it. And I hope we get to see you in May when we come with a small group and do our study tour.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed for your time.